This didn't happen to me, but a very close friend of mine. I've heard a lot about coyotes and skinwalkers, and had a weird experience or two with coyotes. The creepiest was waking up to my sleeping bag being surrounded in paw prints without ever hearing them during the night, but never anything paranormal, so to speak. Patrick's story, however, kept me from going back to my favorite backcountry secret stash. He was leaving the area one morning. He had been camping there a couple days and said it was a coyote that always seemed to be close by, like in his peripheral vision, but never obvious. He loaded up his truck and started to drive down the washout to the fire road. At the end of the wash, he could see the coyote following him. When he pulled onto the road, it was running next to him. Now, he was freaked out, so he sped up. He said he was going 35 or so, and it was just running along beside him. Definitely not something that should be possible. When he looked back, the coyote was running on two legs, and was wearing what Patrick said looked like buckskin pants. An instant later, it was a person wearing a coyote fur keeping pace with his truck. When he looked again, it was gone. We never went back to the grove after that. I was staying at my grandpa's trailer in Arizona for a couple of days with my mom, my dad, and two brothers. I forget why we went out there, but it had to be important because my dad never tagged along with us out there. Anyways, come nighttime, and everyone is asleep except for me. I'm watching Nickelodeon on the TV in the living room when I hear footsteps walking up the front porch. Since my grandpa was up there in years, he had a long wooden ramp to his door. I was expecting something to come to the door and knock, but nothing happened. I just kept hearing it walk up and down the ramp. My grandpa lived about 25 minutes away from the nearest town, and the only neighbors around are other family members. I remember being really scared at this point and couldn't even think straight. My brothers were asleep in the living room and on the couches near me. I couldn't force myself to wake them up. Instead, I calmly walked to the back bedroom where my mom and dad are asleep. I laid down on the floor and tried to go back to sleep myself. Meanwhile, whatever is walking around outside is still doing its thing. After a couple of minutes, I hear my mom attempt to wake up my dad and see if he can hear it. This relieves me because I thought she was asleep the whole time. I told her that I hear it too, so we laid there and listened. My dad is not the best at being coherent after sleep and falls back asleep right away. It stops after a couple of minutes. The next night, the same thing happens, except it's coming up to the back door. I freak out again, and this time just go to the back bedroom and lay down and go to sleep. That's all I remember. I also forgot to mention a weird thing my grandpa said that made sense later. Before turning into sleep, he said something like, "Don't pay attention to anything you hear at night. You'll be safe inside." I should also mention that the next day I remember seeing boot prints and paw prints in the sand by the ramp. This takes place around Christmas. It was cold outside, but I was asked to walk my dog, so I did. I heard the clicking my dog makes when he walks, but my dog is going to the bathroom at the time. I was pretty freaked out. I knew this was wrong, but I had to turn around. When I did, I saw the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. I yanked on my dog's leash and run towards my house, which is so far down the road. I still hear the clicking noises coming from behind me. but it's not my dog. I know that for sure. My grandmother's house is right by my house, and at the time my grandmother was over at my house. Once I make it into the light, it reveals this thing laughing at me, in my own father's voice. Then it starts to run behind me again. I hear the noise of my mother saying, "Come back. I really want to play." Almost getting to my driveway, I hear it saying, "No matter where you go, it's going to be easy to find you. Just stop now." My parents heard me screaming and running outside now. I get into the house and we all hear voices and screaming on the windows. My grandmother brings me to my room and tells me what is happening. She says skinwalkers will connect with a human until they get what they want. At this point, I'm terrified. She still goes on to talk about what they are and what they do to you. 3 weeks later, we still hear scratching at the windows, and it's just as scary as it was that night it all started. We're looking to move, but we know that it might follow us wherever we go. My mother and I lived on the Navajo reservation, on a large cattle and horse ranch when we moved back from California. It was just the two of us, our 3 dogs, and the horses and cows. The place we lived at was very rural and 70 miles away from any towns, 15 miles away from any neighbors, and very heavily wooded. It started off as a normal day. Being the age of 7 years old, I was playing inside my room with my action figures. My mom's vehicle was getting repaired in a local town at the auto center, which left us with no transportation. But my uncles came to check on us, and we had no telephone or cell phone or satellite TV. Since my mom got divorced, my father left us with no money, so we were pretty poor. Visitors were usually non-existent, with the exception of my family coming over. So when a large old truck came driving up behind the house where 2 old cars sat on cement blocks were, it seemed pretty odd. 4 men stepped out of the vehicle, and my mom went to check on why they were parked behind our house. I could see from my bedroom the back of the house. Normally people parked in the front when visiting. My mom talked to them in Navajo, as one of the guys motions to the old blue car and pointed at the back of his truck. My mom shook her head. The other guy started getting angry and was talking loudly to her, but she still shook her head. After a few more minutes of this, the guys got into their cars and left. They sounded angry by the sound of the truck peeling off down the dirt road. My mom came back in and I asked her who they were. She said they wanted the old blue car and asked my older cousin if they could have it and that he said yes. But she said she didn't believe them. So she says, "No, you can't take this car. My nephew will need it to be here when you do take it. And it isn't polite to be sneaking up on people parking behind their homes." She said the guys got upset but said they'd be back. That night after we ate dinner, I went to sleep, I remember. She washed dishes and put wood in the fire and fed the horses and dogs. It was around 2 in the morning that the dogs started barking. My mom shook me awake and told me to hide in the closet. It was dark and I was scared shitless. There was banging on the windows and doors with what sounded like metal objects. I remember hearing laughter and whispers near my window. The smell of decaying meat or decaying potatoes. It was horrible. My mom was openly as scared as I was, but she held a wood axe close to her. The dogs were running around the house barking, and soon I heard 2 of them yelp in pain. My mom shouted at whoever was out there to go away or she'd kill them. The one dog outside sounded like it got into a fight with something, as the other dogs joined in. Then something jumped onto the roof, while something else was hitting the kitchen door with a metal bar or tool or something, and scratching at the back door. We could make out in a strange voice, "You should have let us take that car." Something growled near the window in Navajo. My mom yelled at whatever or whoever was out there to get the hell away from us. We heard laughing and what sounded like coyote yipping near the front of the house. A few minutes later, heavy-pawed feet were heard near the barn, where the metal slab sheets to put on top of the barn roof were laid out for the next day. It sounded like a small pack of 2 or 3. My mom opened the door to check. Near the security light pole sat what looked like a deformed coyote, staring at us. My mom threw a small brick that was near the door, and it moved its face to avoid being hit. This coyote had to have been a skinwalker. It got up and ran in an almost limping fashion away, the tail flapping like dead weight as it ran. In the distance past the barn, we could hear the old truck starting up. As it revved off, something sounded like a dog jumped into the back of the truck. The next day, my mom found that 2 of my dogs had bite wounds on their leg and ear. My other dog had a big raised goose bump on its head like someone hit it with something big. The paint on the doors had long gashes from some type of metal objects, and the back door had claw marks on them where it sounded like something was scratching at the door. Clotted blood was rubbed on the outside of the wall on the front porch. My mom knows it was those guys who came over wanting the old car parked in the back of the house. They came back for us, just for fun, and for that old car. I was going for a walk. It was late and I had nothing else to do. I was about a mile away from my house and was walking on a path in a field far from the main road. It was about 2 a.m., but it wasn't a problem as my parents trusted that I would return home. Anyways, I was walking past a tree line when I started to hear static, like an old radio. That was the only thing I could compare it to. I was rather frightened by this, but I decided to keep walking. Then I heard in a child's voice, "Help." I stopped short. I looked at the tree line frozen, debating on what to do. I stuck one foot out to where the noise came from, and again I heard the voice repeating what it had just said. This time I felt a bit uneasy. The voice sounded so similar to the first time it had called out, as if someone was just repeating a recording. And also it had a bit of a static sound to it. I can't really explain it very well. But I called out, "Hello?" There was no answer. My voice was shaky from fear. I didn't know what to think of the voice. And then it spoke again, but in my voice. It said hello. It sounded just like me, but with that same static-like noise. It said it again, same exact tone from the first time. I backed up a bit, terrified of what I had just heard. I turned and started walking away in a fast pace. I heard a branch snap behind me and I stopped. I looked back and saw a deer, looking at me from the tree line. I was a bit confused by this. Was it really a deer? I thought to myself. Then I kind of just threw the idea away because of how stupid it sounded to me. I ignored the deer and started walking again. I walked for not even a minute and heard something behind me again. I quickly turned to see the same deer standing on the path. Now that it was out in the open and with what moonlight there was showing on it, I saw it more clearly. It had the head of a deer, but the body looked like a human slumped over on all fours. The ribs were slightly showing. It took me a second to realize just how big this thing was. If it were a person, they would have been huge. I stood there frozen for what seemed like a minute, and this thing started to stand up. When it was fully standing, it was easily over 7 foot tall. It stood perfect like a human would. I tried to think of the situation logically. My assumption was that this was a tall person trying to scare me, but the head was too real, and I dismissed this quickly. After a bit of staring at this creature, I finally decided to take a step back. As I did this, the creature took a step forward, not making a sound. I stood frozen again, scared to make a noise, and then this thing said hello, in my voice, the exact way it had the previous times. I was more confused than scared at this point, thinking to run or escape or anything. I was thinking to myself, how could this thing speak? I asked it, "What are you?" It was silent for a bit, and then the thing spoke, in my voice again, with that same static sound accompanying it, repeating what I had just said, still staring at me. I was just frozen, staring at the thing while it did the same thing. I wanted to run or something, but my body wouldn't let me. I just stayed in that same position for what seemed like hours. Finally, for no reason, it walked away, back into the tree line. This was also a little terrifying to witness. It walked on 2 feet, like any normal person would, until it was out of sight. As soon as it got silent, I sped quickly down the path back towards my house. I was sure I would get home no problem, but I was wrong. I heard another branch break and I started sprinting even faster, not knowing what was going to happen. I started to see the main road to my house. It was in sight, but still a distance away. I heard this thing scream. It sounded like a child screaming at the top of their lungs, branches still breaking behind me. I'm sure it was running above the trees. When I got onto the road and got a few hundred feet from my home, all the noises stopped. I looked back over my shoulder and saw it standing there in the middle of the road just staring at me. Right before I turned to continue running, I heard it loudly say hello. It never followed me after that, and that's the last time I ever encountered it, or even heard it.